Welcome to Baseball Biz on Deck, and we have yet another edition with a focus of women in baseball. And as you know, that spans so many different things. If we're looking at coaches, if we're looking at players, looking at college, and looking at executives in the game, whether it be the front office or the people who are making a difference in developing things. And today, I am very happy to announce we have Miss Janet Marie Smith with us. How you doing today, Janet Marie?
Fantastic.
Should get that right. Oh,
No,
anyway,
both is fine. I do both. Don't worry.
it's to me, it's there's something Southern about that too, and genteel about having both names together.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's the Mississippi in me, I guess.
I love it. Well, before we get too much into this, you've got a background in with Mississippi. I think was it you the university there. You studied architecture,
Yeah, sure
and
did.
then later on, you were doing urban planning. I think it was like in New York. Is
In
that
New
correct?
York, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now, my gosh, what you've been able to build on top of that to me is just huge. I'm looking at everything. It's funny, whether it be Camden Yards, Fenway, Dodger Stadium, Ed Smith Stadium. And the funny thing was, Jan Marie, before I was thinking much about you, last year I went to three of those places. I was,
That's great. A road
yeah,
trip.
exactly. The wife and I visited Fenway, Camden Yards, and myself, I went down to Ed Smith to watch the All Americans. Some of the women were putting together a tournament down there, so that was kind of fun. There's so many things to talk about, and yes, you are a leader as far as women in baseball and with executives and achieving things. And I know being the vice president of planning and development for a couple of teams, that is huge. And your ability to impact the game. So thank you for all of that and all that you continue to do.
Well, thank you for noting all of that. It has truly been a pleasure. It's work, but what fun it is when it's over.
Well, and you've been acknowledged too. I mean, even the Hall of Fame has you installed up there with the Diamond Dreams, I believe it is, in
Yeah.
acknowledging your achievement. So, guys and gals, if you haven't been paying attention, there's a couple of places you can find this. Obviously, you can look up Janet Marie Smith online, but if you had the good grace to go to Cooperstown, you can find her and other women who've achieved so much with the sport. But but
I love that.
but seriously, I mean, and I am serious about that. I appreciate all you've done. Okay, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of things I'd like to know, Janet Marie. And that is one. Let's see, like I said, you've worked with Fenway, you worked with Camden Yards, and you were kind enough also to share with me a document talking about the vision of the game. And you detailed three types of ballparks, if I remember correctly. There was the classic one. There was also the ones as far as like an urban metro. And what's the one I'm forgetting at the moment? Cheese and crackers.
I think what you're referring to is a conversation that I had at the spring training conference known as Nine,
Yes.
about ballparks. And I guess the planner in me always wants to organize things into categories. And I think at the time I was thinking, okay, whether the classic parks, they're the round multi-purpose era, and then we have the single purpose buildings that started with Guaranteed Rate Field, New Comiskey in Chicago in 1991, Camden Yards in 92, and then a succession of parks that opened after that. And it's been interesting, just as a casual historian, to look back at all of those different genres of baseball and how they fit into the city or didn't, and
Yeah.
how they supported the sport or didn't.
You're not just building a new stadium. A lot of times you have to come in and you're doing renovations, and certainly with Fenway. In Camden, you had a little bit more wide open because you're starting fresh. Where do I start? I know we have a limited amount of time because there's a couple things. Let's just stick with Camden Yards for a moment. I know you got to work with Larry Lucchino there, and we lost this year, but uh,
Yeah.
he he's a lightning rod with some fans. Some either love
He's
him or
a
don't.
force. Yeah, no, he's a force. Well, you have to appreciate what Larry Lucchino did for baseball. The Camden Yards was really the vision of Larry Lucchino, who is president of the Orioles, wanted to create an old-fashioned ballpark, one that had context, fit in with the city, had the intimacy of a Fenway, an Ebbets, a Shibe, a Forbes, had the architectural characteristics of those classic ballparks. Thankfully, the Orioles were supported at the time by the governor of Maryland, William Donald Schaefer, who had been the former mayor of Baltimore. And his thing was, we have to have a new home for the Orioles. We lost the NFL Colts. We cannot lose our baseball team. How do we keep them here? We need a new stadium. Larry was the one who said it had to be a ballpark. Schaefer said we need a new stadium, but he wanted it to be in Baltimore and to be part of the center city and be a part of the magnetic attraction that had become the Inner Harbor, the aquarium, the science center. And this idea that baseball would be one of the puzzle pieces to create an entertainment district downtown goes back to those days of the late 1980s when those two gentlemen were looking to forge a path to keep the Orioles in Baltimore.
Well, it wasn't something that just falls into place either, because I thought of a question I heard of you that was given to you on another podcast, and the question was, "Hey, Janet Marie, if you could do whatever you wanted and you had all the timeline, all the money, what would you do?" And what I remember from your response was, "I actually like working within the restrictions or
I do.
limitations."
I
And
do. I think it makes things so much more interesting when you have a tether to a place.
yeah,
And Camden Yards, though it was a ground up building, the act of saving the warehouse gave it this instant, timeless feeling. And market also save money. That's the other thing that's so important about preservation. It's not just about keeping history for the nostalgia's sake. There's often, in addition to the obvious environmental benefits of not tearing things down and putting it into
oh
the
yeah,
landfill, one of the things that we were able to prove with the warehouse, which by the way, keeping that was very controversial when it first came up. There were many who said Camden Yards, we didn't have a name then, but but the Camden Yards is the name of the site.
right.
Was that the baseball park needed room to breathe, that the warehouse was going to choke it, that it wasn't going to have enough space around it to feel commodious and welcoming. There were some who were like, that old brick building, who wants to save that? There were others who objected to the fact that it blocked the sight lines of the downtown and presumably a glimpse of the water. But we felt very strongly that it did just the opposite, that it not only grounded this idea, but if we were going to be faithful to Larry Lucchino's mantra of an old-fashioned ballpark, we wouldn't go in and tear down the very thing that gave it context. What made Ebbets Field and Fenway Park, Forbes Field so interesting is that their field dimensions were shaped by the block they were on within the city. It's kind of the amazing thing about baseball is that the outfield dimensions can be whatever they want to be.
Yeah,
Everyone wants it to play fair. You don't want to err on it being a hitter's park or a pitcher's park, but they're not uniform. And that's what makes baseball so interesting place to place. There's a reason that people like you make a pilgrimage of going to all the ballparks.
that's right.
Nobody ever does that with an NBA arena or an NFL stadium. But the idea of how baseball expresses itself is very much in its architecture. So this context, I think, makes it much more interesting. And then I admittedly love the challenge of things like Fenway and Dodger Stadium, where it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
okay, but we're still playing baseball here. How do we upgrade these buildings in such a short amount of time in the off season between November and March? How do you make that happen? That too is a challenge and one that I've really enjoyed.
Well, I'm looking right now at Camden Yards. Right now, there's changes actually being done. I'm looking at Dodger Stadium, and it looks like there's excavation actually going on in the field. And all I can think of, my goodness, the changes that are happening, and you've only got an off season to do some of this stuff. How do you even begin to plan for that?
Well, that is exactly what you do. You plan for it. You can't wake up at the end of the baseball season and say, "Oh, I think I'd like to renovate our clubhouse this off season." You need to spend the season planning these things, getting all of your team lined up, your architects, your contractors, your funding sources, your permitting. You even be have a plan with the city for your inspections. You can't afford to fail. I often say in any project, there's sort of there are three drivers. There's the schedule, there's the budget, and then there's the design, as in the scope. What scale project are you doing? In these projects with baseball, if you're trying to play there, the schedule is really the driver. So you have to moderate the scope of your project to fit that off season. Sometimes you read about teams that are looking to renovate their building and you see huge sums of money that are needed to keep the building maintained. And I know that's obviously born out of real studies that engineers have done, but there's a reality of how much you can spend in the off season.
Yeah.
So you have to stagger these projects so that they don't just build up to where you are forced to do everything in one breath. And I've never known a team to willingly move out and then move back in. I mean, perhaps there are extenuating circumstances, as you all obviously are living through in Tampa, but
Oh, yeah.
that's another story in and of itself. But there are very few times that
Uh,
teams willingly leave their home to
yeah.
come back. You want to make certain that your fan base and your team feel like there is something to be said for the home field advantage, and it's not just financial, it's emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. And since you mentioned, I will touch a little bit on looking at right now, there are two teams in Major League Baseball that will not be returning to their traditional stadium this year. And we're talking about the Oakland, Sacramento, Vegas A's and the Tampa Bay, St. Pete Rays. Uh, it's been interesting. I'll just briefly say, as a fan of the Rays, I'm not going to get into all the mess that's going on. People can read about that somewhere else. But it's interesting that this year they're going to be playing at a minor league field that is actually the spring training field for the New York Yankees. And it's going to be open air. And with the heat and rain here, it's going to be a very challenging deal. But I'm looking across, let's set that to the side for a moment. Looking across at what's actually developing now, we're looking at expansion potentially in MLB. We're talking about Salt Lake City. We're talking about Montreal. Montreal's spending like over what, $840 million right now for a new roof, a multi-purpose stadium. And by any chance, are you working with any of these projects?
No, I'm not working on any of those.
You are doing so much with Dodger Stadium. What's going on with Dodger Stadium right now?
Well, the most exciting thing that we're doing this off season is an expansion of the clubhouse.
Mm.
And while on the surface of it, that may sound like we're knocking down a few walls and rearranging the furniture, as you noted, there is an enormous excavation project underway with huge piles of dirt sitting in center field at the moment. Like most parks, the clubhouse at Dodger Stadium is below grade, and the way that building is carved into the hillside of Chavez Ravine means that there's no going back into the hills, like literally no going back on the level that the clubhouse was originally on. So as we did 12 years ago when Guggenheim and their partners first bought the Dodgers, we took out the lower bowl seats and we're going down and adding square footage so that our clubhouse at Dodger Stadium will be essentially like not just a split level house as it has been the last 12 years, but adding a third level in order to get an additional batting cage and square footage for the kinds of things that the clubhouse needed, accommodating women in the clubhouse, the ability to accommodate the mental health skills, the mental health coach, quiet rooms.
Wow.
I think one of the things that we're seeing in sports is a focus not just on the athlete as the horse, but how to care for that, the total person. And so an emphasis on nutrition, an emphasis on the mental health is every bit as important today as the conditioning and training that we associate with batting cages, weight rooms, etc.
Well, I've had Perry Barber on the show as an umpire and I think back of where you're talking about umpires had to change and what was available and such. And a lot of accommodations, or accommodation may be the wrong word, for women who are participating in the game at different, whether it be an umpire, whether it be coming into the locker room and having a conversation with the players. I'm glad a lot of that's been being addressed, and I'm sure there's always going to be room for improvement. But
Well,
women,
it's really important to think about as a total problem to solve. Also, Perry and I have talked over the years. It's just amazing the field that she pioneered, and I feel like uh, it's been a long time coming seeing
yeah,
women as
yeah,
umpires in the major leagues. I can remember in the early 2000s, that's now 25 years ago, Major League Baseball looked in the mirror and said, "We see it coming." And every building that opened in that 5 year span of 2000 to 2005 was designing their umpire rooms to accommodate men to dress in one area, women to dress in another area, and often had a shared space for dining, playing cards, relaxing, strategizing about the game. And many of them, like Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia, PNC Park in Pittsburgh, were beautifully laid out, not just to give women a place to dress, but to build camaraderie and to allow those who were umpiring to come together. But since no women were ever tapped to fill that role, the rooms got repurposed for coaches or mascots or something else. And it's rather disappointing as a sport that we haven't gotten there yet. But looking at the roster of women and who are now umpiring in the minor leagues and in college, I suspect that will change rapidly.
well, yeah. I mean, I know talking with Perry, and we've had conversations. I think we were both waiting for Jen Powell to come up last year as an umpire, and didn't see that actually happen. And I was gritting my teeth all the way up till we got to the postseason, and was sorely disappointed in that particular. That nothing had happened there from last year. But you'll get me on a rant down there. Watch out. But
Well,
it,
it is a really interesting thing. And if you've ever spent any time with any women who have been in uniform and in a clubhouse, you can appreciate just how challenging it is to retrofit an existing clubhouse so that they feel welcome. It's not just a matter of where do you shower and change, it's how to design the spaces so that anyone can be in those spaces and doing what you naturally do, whether it's dining or building a game plan or reviewing video, and it just sort of feels natural to be there. And hopefully that has become more of a script in recent years.
well, I know you're going to have to go here shortly, but I did want to ask you, looking at women in baseball, whether we were talking about Perry, where we're talking about, with what you've achieved, where do you see more recent advancements coming for women, and what are your hopes and dreams?
Well, I think it's throughout sports. And I think if you look at sports, one of the obvious things is that there's so many disciplines within sports. Like sports is not a discipline. There's finance, there's legal, there's people resources, there's community relations, there's public relations. And then as you start to look at the baseball side, it too breaks down into so many things from nutrition to training to mental health. Just the number of disciplines that it takes to put together a team, both on the field, strategy, as well as the front office and the fan facing strategy, is really phenomenal. And with our colleges being 50% women, 50% men, with the diversity that we have throughout our industries, college not being a prerequisite, just the work environment, I think there's so many opportunities for so many people. And often sports are looking for someone from not from within. I don't think it's an insular industry either. I think some of the best ideas come from somewhere else. I'm a perfect case study. I don't know if I'm a perfect case study, but I'm a good example of that. Like, I didn't come from sports. My interest in working for the Orioles was because they were building this downtown ballpark. And how did you take a piece of real estate and turn it into something that made it feel like a place where people wanted to spend their leisure time, wanted to spend their entertainment dollars, wanted to bring their families, and they maybe weren't sports fans. Maybe they don't really hang on to every pitch or keep score, but how do you create an environment where they want to be, and how do you make that part of the urban setting? But my knowledge base of that didn't come because I inherently knew baseball.
Right.
That was a bonus. It came from having worked in urban design and planning for so many years before I joined the Orioles. So I've always loved and admired professionals who don't just recycle ideas, but rather look at other areas and draw inspiration from that.
Whether it be from outside or inside. And I don't want to get too much into this, but I thought even when you were putting together Camden Yards, you actually pulled somebody from the inside. You look at Frank Robinson to get a different kind of insight and perspective. But
Of course,
looking
Frank was the ultimate insider, but what better credibility could you have than to reach out to Frank Robinson, who was then the manager of the Orioles, for advice on the ballpark? But I do just want to dwell on that for a moment because I've often felt that Frank Robinson, as our manager, was our secret weapon on Camden Yards because no matter that the vision of doing this old-fashioned ballpark with the asymmetrical outfield and the
Mhm.
small amount of foul territory came from the driving force that Lucchino brought to it. That was such a novel idea that it took someone like Frank and his credibility to say, I can speak from experience. I played in those parks, and there is a world of difference in the way the game is played and the way that fans respond to the game in those parks. I mean, of course, at the time, we still had Fenway and Wrigley, as we do today, as proof of that. And Larry would point to that. He would say, how can the two smallest parks in the major leagues be consistently drawing the highest attendance, no matter what their performance on the field? There's something to be said about the environment they're
Yes,
in.
there is.
And I've always loved remembering the way those two gentlemen and their convictions came together.
Well, I just had to bring him up because I thought of, while we are talking about the diversity of bringing people in from different types of businesses and mindsets, but to be able to integrate that with other folks who are actually maybe been in the trenches, so to speak, with the game, like Frank
Yeah.
Robinson. But when we're talking again about women, I know in the past I've done some presentations, and one of the people I was looking at in the past were people like Marty Ronsky with the Brewers at the time, Carolyn Perry, I think with the San Diego Padres, Katie Griggs, she's with the I think president of
The
business
Orioles.
operations. Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
of the Orioles. Yeah.
That's right.
Recently joined. Now, all of Baltimore was excited about that.
Even locally, well, since we got spring training everywhere, was going over to Yankees, George Steinbrenner Stadium, and seeing Rachel Balkovec, that minor league team. But Kim Ang is to me one of the most pivotal people because I'm looking at this woman. She was a lawyer. She worked within Major League Baseball. She was with the Yankees with Brian Cashman. She negotiated the Garrett Cole contract. Then was general manager with the Marlins, and now she's got a new venture coming up. I got to get more details on that, but it's great to see women being able to expand and not just be set into one position. And yes, that's nice. We have a lady in the club today. Okay, no, you've got a professional who's able to execute and is making a difference.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think the day that we don't have to point out that it's a woman is going to be a wonderful day.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And speaking of thank you, do you have anything else you want to make sure we share with the
No,
audience?
that's fun. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you. And just as a side note, in your background, I see you got Tony Stone up there on the wall, and I absolutely love her. I think quickly, folks, Tony Stone was like, to me now, if you look at it, she was the first woman in Major League Baseball because once the Negro Leagues were combined with Major League Baseball, I believe Tony, because she was with the Indianapolis Clowns, are now part of Major League Baseball. So I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I do too. It's nice to have a pennant pinned up in my office to celebrate.
Can't thank you enough. It's been a real pleasure having you here
All right.
today. And I wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. So take
Thank you,
care.
Mark. I enjoyed the conversation. I look
Oh,
forward to seeing you in the spring when we all have a new roster, a new opportunity to see how the season unfolds.
amen, sister. Amen.
You have been listening to a Women in Baseball edition of Baseball Biz on Deck with special guest Janet Marie Smith, Senior Vice President of Planning and Development for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Special thanks to Gianna Denise and Rick Vaughn for making this episode possible. Thank you all for listening, and remember, you can find Mark at baseballbizondeck.bsky.social. You may also find Baseball Biz on Deck on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and at baseballbizondeck.com.